Hey there, and welcome to the Disruptive Leadership Series webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about fear, focusing effectively amid Rona. We are day 2 in week 3 into this quarantine, but who's counting? And I am live from my kitchen table. So if you hear dogs I'm sorry, it is what it is. But my name's Chelsea Powell. I'm the Assistant Director for Internal Leadership Development here at the Leadership Institute at Columbus State University. We're very thankful that you've logged on with us again. We really want our sessions to be as interactive as possible. So we do have a Q&A feature. So please go ahead, tell us if this is your first time with us, if you came back to see us again. From our last week's webinar on leading remotely. So please utilize the chat function and we'll be checking in here and there. But I'm pleased to present our facilitator today, Cedricia Thomas. She is one of our instructors, facilitators at the Leadership Institute. Cedricia has experience working with our students, our faculty and staff at CSU, and our external clients on leadership development. So I'm very excited to bring her to you to talk about fear. So welcome, Cedricia.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, and thank you again for all of our attention, allowing us to spend a portion of your day. So today we're going to talk about fear. So it's no secret, you all, that we are in a time of crisis, uncertainty, and a little bit of chaos, right? And so a lot of us, our schedules have changed tremendously. We're working from home. A lot of children are completing their schoolwork from home. A lot of us are trying to make sure that we have all of our essential supplies, that we're not running out of anything. We're trying to make sure that our loved ones are safe, that they're cared for. We're trying to stay healthy. And unfortunately, some people have also lost steady income, and some people have lost loved ones as well. So fear, worry, anxiety are emotions that not only America is feeling, but that the entire world is feeling. So I just want to take a moment, in your day for us to chat about 4 core fears and ways that you can combat fear and ways that you can manage your focus a little bit during this time. So right now, I want to start with the definition of fear. So fear is often defined as an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or an awareness of danger. A lot of people also define it as an anxious concern. So personally for me, I can be totally transparent with you all and say that I have felt fear during this time. And when you feel fear, you often feel alone, or you feel maybe not comfortable sharing it with others, or maybe you feel like, oh man, what I'm feeling or what I'm fearing sounds a little bit stupid. So I don't know if I want to share this with anyone, but I want to bring you good news. I want you to know that you are not alone. So when we look at just America as a whole, about 9.1% of Americans, more than 19 million Americans, really deal with or struggle with a specific fear. And then when we really look at our teenagers, we do not want to forget them during this time because they're trying to adjust to. About 15.1% of teenagers also struggle with a specific fear. So again, you're not alone. We're all in this together and we will definitely get through. And so if you were on our page, if you were looking at our pre-poll, you see that we asked you 2 questions before the webinar. And so one of those questions was, what are you most fearful of during this pandemic? And so a lot of you all actually mentioned that you are fearful of a loved one testing positive for COVID. And a lot of our responses were things like being laid off, or you testing positive for COVID, or you having to work from home for another month or 2 or longer, or all of the above. So if you didn't get a chance to respond to the pre-poll, definitely go ahead in the chat and tell us what you're feeling fearful of the most during this pandemic. And so the next question that we asked is, how do you cope with your fears? How do you cope with your worries and your anxieties? And we mentioned things like movement and exercise. We mentioned things like talking to a loved one. We mentioned things like taking deep breaths. And a lot of you all said that prayer and meditation was one of the most consistent ways that you actually cope with your fears and your anxieties from day to day during this pandemic. And so what I want us to do is to go into 4 specific fears. So we talked a little bit about, what you're feeling fearful of during this time. And again, a lot of you all said that a loved one testing positive for COVID was probably your greatest fear during this time. But now I want to go into 4 core fears that was named by Daniel B. Lancaster. And I want to say that the first step to combating fear is really raising your awareness about it. And so you want to become aware, you want to be able to name it to tame it, right? So again, a lot of times with fear, maybe you're not verbalizing it, you're not communicating it, but the first step is really raising that awareness and allowing yourself to know that, okay, this is what I'm feeling, this is what it's called, okay? So the first thing we're going to do as we've begun is name it to tame it. So 4 Core Fears by Daniel B. Lancaster presents that there are possibly 1 to 2 fears that you struggle with the most, according to if you prefer extroversion or introversion, or if you refer to yourself as being more so task-oriented or people-oriented. So as I'm talking through these 4 core fears, I want you all to type in the chat box which of the fears you feel maybe give you most of your heartache and your headache, okay? So again, 1 to 2 fears, you can go ahead and post those into the chat box. And again, if you need to think back to assessments like Myers-Briggs and DISC to just remind yourself, do I prefer extroversion or introversion? Do I consider myself to be more task-oriented or people-oriented? And so then we'll check in with you to see what you're saying in the chat box in a few minutes. So I want to go through each quadrant first. So the first quadrant, we have task-oriented extroverts. So these people typically struggle with guilt, okay? And, a lot of times we summarize task-oriented extroverts as being people who want to lead others and achieve tasks, making the world safer and a more secure place for everyone. So the next quadrant, people-oriented extroverts, people who typically struggle with rejection. You want to be out there helping people make the world a more loving and giving place. People-oriented introverts who typically struggle with shame, you want to work behind the scenes to make sure there is harmony and justice in the world. And then task-oriented introverts typically struggle with blame. So you work behind the scenes to make sure everything is done in high quality. And so what we're about to go into now are specific behaviors and actions that take place when we are trying to cover up a specific fear. So when we're trying to cover up rejection fear, when we're trying to cover up shame fear, when we're trying to cover up guilt fear or blame fear, these are the specific actions and behaviors that typically accompany that. And so what I'm about to share with you, you may feel a few ouch moments throughout, and I don't want you to be discouraged by that, because what we're doing is just raising awareness of what our actions and our behaviors can become when we are feeling very fearful and when we are in a high stress environment. So, task-oriented extroverts, you typically struggle with guilt. So when you're trying to cover up this guilt fear, or when you're feeling very stressful, you may cover this up by controlling your environment, by making others feel guilty, by making demands on others to deflect focus on mistakes, and maybe you never apologize. People-oriented extroverts who struggle with rejection, you cover rejection fear by rejecting others before they reject you, by people-pleasing and performing in ways that will make people happier, and by saying the right words so people accept you. You do the right things to appease others. Our next quadrant, we have people-oriented introverts for shame. You cover shame fear by never disagreeing with anyone. You avoid conflict at all costs, and you stuff everything in an emotional suitcase. And then lastly, we have task-oriented introverts who struggle with blame. So you cover blame fear by deciding to do everything perfectly. So again, a few of you all may feel like, oh my gosh, ouch, I've totally seen myself do this before. But again, we're just raising awareness, because when you are feeling very fearful or stressed, a lot of times our actions and behaviors do change, or we act in ways that we typically don't act. So I want you to observe yourself during these next few days. I'd encourage you to do so and see if any of these actions or behaviors are coming up. So observe yourself as you're working remotely, or you're interacting with your colleagues, or you're interacting with your student and maybe overseeing their homework and their projects. You're interacting with your spouse and your loved ones. Observe yourself as you're navigating through these times. And you may see that maybe I am being a people pleaser right now. Maybe I am avoiding conflict and just putting everything in an emotional suitcase and not letting everything out. Maybe I am controlling my environment a little too much and not taking my hands off of things that I have no control over. Or maybe I am trying to be a perfectionist, since I am so stressed. Maybe I'm trying to make sure that everything is just perfect, right? Every I is dotted and every T is crossed. So again, I'd encourage you to just observe yourself these next few days and see what your actions and your behaviors are. And so now I'll take a pause and send it over to Chelsea to see what some of our fears were.
Thank you, Tracy. Well, so from some of the comments that I'm seeing, I think the one thing that is really coming out is that one of our biggest fears is really how this is going to impact our loved ones around us, and rightfully so. And so I think, kind of what you said, what is your core fear? Being able to acknowledge that, but also where are your family members, right? Well, maybe what are their fears and your team members, and how can you help them in this time? We have Ellie says guilt and rejection are some of the core fears that she resonates with. Renee, rejection and shame. Let's see, we have a mix between shame and blame. And then Carl says people-oriented introvert, but really feels that his fear and actions correlate to rejection. So, a lot of great insight here. And, before I bounce it back to you, Tracy, my suggestion is, as Tracy continues to go through this, do think about where you are, but also where your family might be and how you can help support them and your team members at this time. Back to you, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. And I liked what one of our attendees mentioned, that they identified themselves as maybe, let's say, a people-oriented extrovert, but that their fear was completely in a different quadrant. That is totally normal, right? So what actually Daniel B. Lancaster says is that we all struggle with these 4 fears, right? But 1 to 2 give us our most of our heartache and our headache. And it can be very possible that maybe you do consider yourself more extroverted, but maybe your fear happens to lie in more of an introverted quadrant. So that is totally normal, and I'm so glad that one of our attendees happened to mention that in the chat. So as we continue, I want to talk a little bit about the side effects of fear. Before we talk about ways to combat fear, I want us to look at side effects of fear and really bring awareness to the fact that fear can really have a big impact on us. So negative emotions are just as contagious as the virus. So I'll say that again. Negative emotions are just as contagious as the virus. So we really want to be careful, what we're feeling within ourselves, and then how we're interacting with people around us, right? And so sometimes, or actually many of the times, fear undermines our ability to think clearly and creatively, to manage our relationships effectively, to focus attention on the right priorities, to make smart, informed choices, and to see the big picture. And a lot of times fear can also lead to breakdown, to burnout, and to many overreactions as well. And so I thought that this was just such a powerful quote here that says that when we're in the grip of our fears, we are at least 25 times less intelligent than we are at our best. So when I read that, it was almost like a virtual slap in the face, because I said, oh, wow, this is really something that people need to know, so that we can, take more of an initiative to really manage our fears. And I'll share just a personal quick story. I am terrified of frogs. And so years ago, a frog landed on my windshield, and I was with a friend that night. And so they said, Tracy, you really do lose all cognitive ability when you're around frogs. And so when I read these side effects of fear, it made me think about the fact that you really do not make the decisions and the choices that maybe you typically would make if you felt that you were safe, or if you felt that you weren't in a fearful environment. So again, I just wanted to share, the side effects of fear and really what it can do to maybe our thinking, the ways we come to decisions, the way we interact with our loved ones as well. So ways to combat fear, okay? So again, the first thing we talked about a little bit earlier was bringing that awareness to the table, bringing it to the light, naming it to tame it. So in addition to awareness, we also want to be aware of our different selves that can often arise when we feel like we're in threat and danger. So we have our overwhelmed self, which is defenseless, vulnerable, childlike. And then we have our adult self, who can be very soothing and reassuring, much like a parent who is soothing a child. And then we have our survival self, who can be reactive, impulsive, and counterproductive. And I'd like to think about those actions and behaviors that were listed for those 4 core fears as survival self when you're trying to cover up those fears, right? A lot of those times we are in survival mode, or we are acting with our survival self. Other ways to combat fear is to say it out loud and bring it to the light, which is exactly what we did. You know, we put it in the chat box. We brought awareness to the table. We brought it to the light. Some people may have to write it down and trash it. I remember in one of my organizations in college, we used to take rocks and then throw them out into the river downtown. And it took me years to really see the benefit of that. But writing your fears down, or writing what concerns you or worries you, and then just trashing it can really help people. You want to listen and observe to what the focus of your fear is. So let's say you're feeling very fearful. Is the focus of your fear more so on the present? If it is on the present, then a lot of times that it can be our body's natural response to just letting us know, hey, you may be in danger. If what you're feeling is more so a fear that's focused on the past and the future, which a lot of times can be out of our control, then maybe you should take deep breaths, which clears cortisol, which is the most pernicious stress hormone, right, when we're feeling fearful. Or maybe you should do some movement and some exercise, which discharges stress and quiets the body and the mind. So now I want to take just a small pause as well before we talk about more ways to manage fear and ways to manage our focus, to see if we do have any questions, Chelsea, in the chat box.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, we do have a couple, but I did want to touch base. I think what you said, you know, talking about negative emotions are just as contagious as the virus. Yeah. I think that is so crucial right now and something to remember. And it goes back a little bit to our last webinar on leading others and how do we do that remotely. And I think that just, if we can remember even to be positive and not have these negative emotions and try to be our very best for our teams, I think that is our number one first step in how we can be great leaders right now and how we can lead our teams and our families at this point, trying to not have those negative emotions. So I just wanted to talk about that real quick because I think that's so powerful. Yeah. So Brianna asked, what type of impact does fear have on our minds and our thinking?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and a lot of that we did just touch on, but as you can see, when we are feeling very fearful, sometimes we're not making the best decisions, right? And you'll even see here that cortisol rises in our body, which is a pernicious stress hormone, right? And so our mind and our body is just kind of out of whack, right? Or it's unbalanced. And so, you know, we're not navigating or even behaving in the way that we do. So when it does affect the mind, we're not making the best decisions, or maybe we're not interacting with our loved ones the way that we typically would, or maybe we're not operating at our highest productivity level, right? We're not accomplishing as many tasks because we're feeling fearful, right? And so it has so many, it yields so many negative things, from the decision making to the relationships to, you know, us getting our jobs done, when fear really does impact the mind and then the body as well. And so again, I reiterate that exercise and moving the body is good too, because it just discharges that stress that may otherwise just be in just sit there, right, if we don't move our bodies. And so I think that it is important to exercise, or to really view how you're interacting with people during this time, how you're making decisions during this time, and, you know, what you're getting accomplished day by day and week by week, because it really does have such a huge impact on mind and body.
Yeah. You know, this kind of just has me thinking about the foresight assessment and the creative problem solving process. And so what they say is that when we as humans get to a point where there's a crisis or a problem, that, you know, we've heard of the 3 ways that we can handle it, flight, fight, or freeze, that humans actually have a 4th option, and that's to innovate.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful. And we're finding ourselves as leaders trying to figure out these new ways of doing things. Hence, while, you know, I'm at my kitchen doing this webinar and trying to continue to be innovative leaders. So I think we do have one more great question that I'd like to cover right now, Tracy. And this one says, you know, as a leader, how do I not let my team members sense my fear during this time? Tracy, I just want to mention again that the negative emotions and trying to be positive, I think, is a really great start for that. But what are some other suggestions that you have?
Yes, I see that it sounds like the person is trying to hide their emotions, and I'd actually tell you to do the opposite. I think that during this time, it's very important to be transparent and vulnerable with your team, right? So have a moment to say, you know, how is everyone doing? You know, how do you feel during this time? And as a leader, sometimes you may feel, you know, I don't want to be too transparent. I don't want to be too vulnerable because I don't want to be seen as weak, right? Or I don't want to be seen as, okay, I'm not in charge because now they know how I really feel. But I think that by telling your team, you know what, we're all in this together. We're going to make it. I am feeling a bit nervous right now. I am feeling a bit fearful and uncertain. I don't know what kind of changes are coming by the end of the day or even by tomorrow morning. But sharing that with your team will really, I think, allow everybody to just take a deep breath, and just woo-saw to know, like, okay, I'm not in this alone, right? Because sometimes with your fears, you can feel like I am the only one feeling this, but allowing your team to everybody to feel it equally, right? So just having that open communication, I would say increase that open communication with your team and allow them to see, you know, how you're really feeling, and be flexible throughout it all. But I wouldn't encourage you to hide those emotions. I would encourage you to bring them to the light and share it with your team so that you all can truly be a team and be there for one another. Because if they don't know how you feel, then that might make you feel more alone, because more people may check on you or see how they can help you or take some things off of your plate when you do share how you really feel.
That's excellent, Tracy. And I think too, you know, going back to leading teams effectively and remotely, what a great way to build trust and then kind of throw it all out there and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. What are you feeling? Great. We're in this together. So really trying to humanize this connection again. So yeah, great. I love it. All right. Well, I think for questions, we're good for now. So back to you.
Thank you so much. So next we're going to go into more ways to combat fear. So, you know, like I said earlier, there's a lot that we can control, but then there's a lot that we cannot control. So one of those ways to combat fear is to focus on what you have the power to influence, and then just let go of the rest, right? There's so much that is just out of our hands. And I think we have to surrender to the fact that we don't have control over everything right now. Reflect before taking immediate action. So, you know, we've discussed a couple of times already, you know, how fears can really yield maybe not the best results in terms of our actions and in terms of our interactions with our relationships. So if you're feeling very fearful, reflect first and then take action. Connect with others, whether it's your friends, your loved one, counselors. Getting the fears off of your chest, no matter how stupid you think they sound, no matter how uncomfortable it feels, can really help you to feel better in the long run. And then communicate with compassion and help others. So when we are feeling fearful, it's very easy to become tunnel vision, right? Because all we're thinking about is this one fear, this one reoccurring thought, and we're not seeing the big picture. And so by helping someone else, you take your eyes off of what you're fearful of, and you're able to help them, which aids not only them, but you as well, because your attention is going to somewhere completely different. Then be realistic. Fears can bring a lot of irrational thoughts. So, you want to ask yourself, am I being realistic right now, or is this a little bit irrational? And then look for inspiration. If it's music, if it's podcast, if it's books, if it's a specific person or a loved one, look for some inspiration and surround yourself with that. And then prayer and meditation, which of course is what a lot of you all said you typically do to cope with your fears already. So with the previous ways to combat fear, a lot of them do have benefits. So, navigating through fear can be very uncomfortable. You may not want to tell anybody. You may just be irritated at the fact that you even had the fear, right? But I want you to know that discomfort means you're stretching, and that's a good thing. I think that this time is stretching all of us, actually. And then next, admitting you're scared builds that trust and that loyalty. So that goes back to the question that was asked, admitting that you're afraid, and communicating that with your loved ones and with your team builds that trust and that loyalty. And I think you'll be able to see that days and months and by the end of this year, how much closer you all become because of that. And then next, fear can give you and your team energy to do more and dream more. So when we get to a point where we can manage our fears and we can manage our focus, it can actually yield some very successful results if we are able to really move that fear out of the way and deal with it in an effective way, and then manage our focus effectively. We'll really see our innovation and our creativity shine bright. Some ways to manage your focus, because I do understand that when we are feeling very fearful, it can be very hard to concentrate, right? It can be very hard to be productive. So Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt gave some excellent tips on how to manage your focus and your day-to-day and your week-by-week schedule. So one, take charge of your environment, right? So we all want to be updated with the latest on the pandemic, right? We don't want to be in the dark. We don't want to not know what's going on, but you have to balance that. And so, I would encourage you to really observe, how much news am I taking in, day by day? And do I have the news on a little bit too much? Are there news apps on my phone that I can silence? Are they sending me notifications consistently throughout the day? Do you have loved ones? I know I do. I have aunts, uncles, mom, cousins that send me updates, and they do it out of love, but sometimes I cannot handle it. And so that there are certain times where I'm not opening messages if I know it's something about coronavirus and, and all of those things. I don't open it. But like I said, balance it, because you do want to be in the know. So maybe you take 15 to 30 minutes out of your day and say, okay, this is my time for my pandemic update. I'm watching the news. I am looking at all of the messages from my loved ones. I am looking at these news apps, but it will not consume my day, right? So really take charge of what you're letting yourself see and what you're letting yourself hear during this time. Next is declutter your space, right? So a lot of times, when there's a lot of clutter around you, your mind feels more cluttered. So I know for me, after I get done organizing or just clearing whatever my workspace is, my mind feels like it is just able to breathe and function a little bit more better, right? So when you declutter your space, I always feel like you're decluttering your mind as well. Next is increase your frustration tolerance. So I can probably be almost 99% sure that all of us have felt frustrated in some kind of capacity during this time. And I would encourage you to increase your frustration tolerance, because we don't know how many more updates and changes are happening. And we want to be able to handle those challenges and navigate through that in the best way possible. As we go on to discuss a little bit more about managing your focus, plan out your days and weeks, even if you're taking it day by day, or even if you're taking it week by week. So Michael Hyatt says here to consolidate, to designate, and to activate. So when we're looking at consolidate, he says to put your task into 3 areas. So we have front stage task, we have backstage task, and we have off stage task. So your front stage tasks are your key functions and your primary deliverables. Your backstage task is coordination, preparation, maintenance, and development. So whether it be like your personal development, your team's development, and then your offstage task is your time when you are off of work, family, friends, relaxation, rejuvenation. And please, please, please balance that as well. Make sure that if you are working from home, that you don't have too many front stage and backstage tasks, and you have no offstage tasks. And then make sure also, if you're working from home, that you don't have too many offstage tasks and not enough front and backstage tasks. So I think a lot of us are struggling in different ways there, but just make sure that you're balancing all of the tasks effectively. Next is designate. So stage tasks so they fit in your schedule and hold back the tyranny of the urgent, right? So it's you taking control of when you do what and making it work for you. And then lastly, activate. Eliminate interruptions and distractions and make maximal use of your unique skills and abilities. So again, making your schedule work for you. So hopefully you'll be able to take away some of these ways that you can manage your focus and allow you to be a little bit more productive during this time. And so one of the things that we discussed not too long ago was that how fear can really allow you and your team to really create some awesome things. So what I wanted to do was share with you some success stories from previous challenging times, right? Because if we become experts of how to manage our fears, if we become experts of how to manage our focus, then I really do believe that innovation and creativity and productivity will soar. And so I want you to see that during the Great Depression, chocolate chip cookies were created. So during a recession in the 1890s, the basketball was created. And then most recently, during the 2008 recession, you can see that WhatsApp and Venmo, Groupon, Instagram, Uber, Pinterest, and Slack were created. A lot of these are items and apps that we use almost on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. So again, learning how to manage our fears, learning how to manage our focus is so crucial during this time, because I think it directly has an impact on what we can produce and create during this time that can really become our norm after all of this blows over. And so I want to leave you with this quote that says, "Fear is reality when dealing with tough times, but how you manage it is the measure of effective leadership. One who succumbs and gives up surrenders the ability to lead. Standing up to fear acknowledges its presence, and resolving to move forward requires determination and, yes, courage." So I want to encourage you all to move forward with determination, move forward with courage, really observe yourself throughout these next few days, throughout these next few weeks. And I hope that you were able to really take some valuable information, whether it was bringing your fear to the light while you put it in the chat box, becoming more aware of maybe fears that you deal with on a consistent basis, and developing and finding more ways to combat your fear and to manage your focus as well. So I hope you're able to take some valuable information, and I want us to pause for a Q&A to see what we have in our chat box, Chelsea.
Thanks, Tracy. So I do want to talk about the success stories real quick. I think that is so important to remember, and not that our success, story has to be the invention of chocolate chip cookies, but a different variation right now might be really nice. But think about, last week we talked about leading remotely, and a part of that was being able to celebrate the small wins with you and your team. So what are those success stories that you and your team have been doing? We talked about the flight, fight, or freeze. Well, the innovate, right, as humans. So what have you been doing? Have you taken the time to really celebrate that with your team? Because I guarantee you, there are those small success stories that you already have. Now we just have to take time to actually celebrate those for each other. So a question that we have, let me pull it up real quick. So, one of the things that we've seen common out, throughout this session is that one of our biggest fears is how this impacts our family. Mm-hmm. So Tracy, how can I help my family keep their stress levels down due to the circumstances and what's going on?
That's a very good question. I think one, open communication. So if you all just have time where you get together and say, okay, check-ins, daily and weekly check-ins, in other words, where you have moments where you're just checking on everybody emotionally and mentally, making sure that everybody's okay. Everyone kind of handles or navigates through their fears differently. So some people may want to write it down, right? Some people may want to actually verbalize it. And I think that parents and loved ones kind of know their family members best. So when you all do get together with that open communication, you may know that one of your children, okay, they need to write it down. Okay, my other child may need to verbalize this. So giving them that moment to do that. And also having more time together. You know, although this is a tough time, I have been seeing and hearing so many wonderful stories that families are, you know, eating dinner every night. Whereas if we were still in the hustle and bustle of things, maybe it's once a week that everybody can have dinner together, or you're watching more movies together, you're having game night together. So having more of those times together, which is taking everyone's time off of, you know, what's actually going on, you know, right outside of our doors.
Thank you, Tracy. So a question, someone's asking for a friend. If my supervisor is task-oriented and introverted, how do you suggest I talk to him about my fears balancing front and backstage tasks versus offstage tasks, like kids?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I'd say, and I'm going to assume that maybe this person is opposite. I think you said that your supervisor was introvert and task oriented. So I'm going to assume that maybe you're opposite, and you want to. What I'm understanding is you want to communicate with your supervisor how to bounce off of those front stage, backstage tasks. I say be honest. You know, this is a time where I think flexibility is so very important, and hopefully all team members and all supervisors are being as flexible as we can, but really communicate and share, you know, maybe what your desires are, or listening to what their desires are, maybe how you can best make that work, or maybe how you all can meet in the middle in terms of those front stage tasks and those backstage tasks, because they're all equally important, right? You may put one, especially the front stage task, may be ahead of the backstage task at certain points, but they're all equally important, and you know, one shouldn't get more of an attention than the other. They should all have our hands on them at some point. So I think that open communication and that honesty is something else other than communication that's really needed during this time, because we're already feeling so emotional. So that the last thing you want to do is maybe to keep a concern, you know, inward. You want to get it out. And so if you do feel comfortable with communicating with your supervisor who's very task oriented and very introverted, I think you should do it. And because you know that they are task oriented and introverted, then you know that conversation may look different with a supervisor who is maybe people oriented and an extrovert, right? So just making sure that knowing what their preferences are, that you're communicating in the way that they will best understand that. So I say honesty, I say chat with them about that.
Yeah, and Tracy, I think you brought up a really great point too, is knowing what their personality is, and right, and having that understanding of, okay, this is what Tracy needs from me and this is what I need from you. And so, you know, ask them. So I think that communication is truly key, and just having an understanding of how you can meet their needs right now and what that communication needs to look like. So another question here, Laura is asking, how should I assist my team in conquering their current fears and worries during this time?
Yes, I think this goes a little bit into that open communication, is, you know, giving them a chance to verbalize it or say it, you know, during this time. And I think that as well is being flexible too, because I don't think it's not only a fear of course, we want to stay healthy. We don't want to catch COVID-19. We don't want a loved one to catch COVID-19, but we're also trying to adjust to working online, right? And so that also brings maybe fears and emotions on top of the fears of the virus as well. And so I think that having that open communication again, you know, is good to do. And then having those check-ins, just like we said that one would do for their family, do it again for your team and have those check-ins. It may work differently with some people. Some people may prefer phone, some people may prefer video, but making sure that you combine all of those, because I think sometimes seeing people, I know for me, with our team, we've been seeing each other through staff meetings. That helps a fear, or that may help, you know, an anxiousness that I'm feeling, versus if we were only having phone meetings. So mixing it up to meet your team's needs, and that'll be different for every person. Some people may just need email, some people may just need a phone call, some people may need face-to-face virtually. So meeting each team member where they are according to their personality and their preferences, I think will really minimize and lower fears.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just knowing what your team needs and what your team members need. My team knows that I need you to video chat me during this time because that's what I need. I need that energy and I need that human connection. So, Dreesy, you mentioned talking about, okay, having a limited time during your day to really talk or check the news and see what's going on in the pandemic. And I find it really difficult too. I don't have cable, but I have Hulu. And the other day, there was a COVID-19, ad on my Hulu. And, it was just this moment where I can't even escape it, and now it's found its way into my Hulu account and advertising there, or just keeping us in the know. So what are some other tricks to pull yourself out of the fear-based, kind of brain that we have into rational, action-oriented thinking?
That's a good one. The other day I heard that if you think about something more than 5 times, that's when it becomes a worry. Mm-hmm. So I'd say, really listen and observe what your thoughts are doing. Because sometimes we're thinking and we're worrying, but we don't stop to say, okay, let me listen to this fear. Okay, what is it saying? First of all, is it even realistic, or is it just some irrational, fear that, will never happen? And most of our fears never happen, right? So really stop to take a moment to listen to your fears. And if you feel like it's consuming your day, like that's all you're thinking about, then yes, it has moved not only from thoughts to, it's now moved to worry. And so the same thing has happened to me, Chelsea. I was trying to watch a YouTube video and COVID-19, and then I see the little picture of the virus. I don't know for y'all, but that freaks me out when you see the actual picture, and then I'm just like, I don't want to see that. So I completely am there with you, and I understand it. But I think, again, just really finding ways to minimize, what you're letting in, and then when you're letting it in, and really stopping to think what your thoughts are doing. I don't think we do that enough, right? Because we're so used to the rustle and the bustle and the moving and what our thoughts are doing. But stop and really think about it, because sometimes a thought can be consuming you and controlling you so much that if you were to really stop and think about it, you realize, oh, I have power over this thought. Like, it's really, I can deal with this. I also think too, I would say too, I heard someone say that you should give yourself 5 minutes to deal with that worry or to deal with that fear, right? Because we don't want to just keep pushing it away. But let's say you give yourself 5 minutes out of your day to say, you know what, this one thing that keeps making me fearful, let me just deal with it for 5 minutes. Me and you, fear, face to face, let me deal with it for 5 minutes. And then after those 5 minutes, whether it's morning, afternoon, or night, don't deal with it anymore. So you think you're balancing your schedule and what you're really consuming.
Yeah. Thank you. I think what I just realized, Dreesy, is that I have a lot more worries than I thought I originally did. I think about a lot more things more than 5 times. So There's that. So, I think what this does is really just kind of puts it out there, and that we do all have fears and we all have worries. Carl mentioned in the chat that, he finds that helping others at this time takes his mind off of his own struggles and fears. And I think that's really good advice. How can we meet the needs of each other? How can we meet the needs of our families and our team members that can help minimize our fears, but also help support them during this time as well? Exactly. So, Dreesy, is there anything else that you'd like to mention or close with as we start coming to a wrap with this webinar?
Yeah, I'd say, observe yourselves during this time. I think that awareness is one of the most important things, but just take a few days, a few weeks to really observe yourself. See when some of those actions and behaviors are coming out. See and get to the bottom and the root of, okay, what am I actually really fearful of right now? And start incorporating some of the ways to combat fear that we discussed today, and some of the ways to manage your focus that we discussed today, and really find what works for you. Because like I said, I do believe that that will really yield innovation and creativity, and that production will really soar once we can really zone in on how we're managing our emotions and our fears and our focus overall. So I hope that everyone enjoyed it, and thank you all again for attending.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. So just to wrap up with a couple things, remember Tracy's slide, the success stories. I think, think about what those success stories are for you and your team, to help you get you through this hard time. And I think, I'm very thankful that you've decided to join us again today. I think what this allows for us, I know I'm going to speak for my team right now, is just a space where we can connect again and have some conversation around what's going on. And it makes me feel better about it. So hopefully it does for you as well. Just a couple of things as we go into start to close. If you want our presentation and some of the slides, we'll have it on our Facebook page within 48 hours. If you want us to email it to you, just enter your email address in the chat and we'll send them your way. We want to keep you as connected and give you the information that you want. As always, we've put it out here. This is the first time that we've done this. So please take the time to fill out a survey on your experiences. Let us know what we did well. Let us know what we can do better, because we want to make sure that we're meeting your needs at this time. So you'll see a QR code and you'll see a link on the next slide. And so just please give us your honest thoughts and feedback. We are going to do another webinar this week, so please join us on Thursday, April 2nd at noon. We'll have Dr. Kelly Baez, and she'll discuss coronavirus anxiety and how to combat panic in a pandemic, right? So we talked about our fear, but now let's talk about, okay, how can we actually manage our anxiety that we have, and how can we help our team do it? So there's also a QR code and link to a pre-survey on the screen. So if you'll also take a minute to answer the pre-survey, which will help us formulate kind of our content for the Thursday's webinar. And on behalf of the staff at the Leadership Institute, we so appreciate your questions and interest, and more importantly, your engagement and support. I mean, we need the support too. So we're supporting you as you're helping us kind of get through this time of unknown. If you have any topic ideas, let us know what they are. You can email us at theleadershipinstitute@columbusState.edu. So, just one thing to remember, right? Flight, fight, or freeze. Remember that we as humans can also take this time to innovate. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you. And I hope to see y'all again on Thursday. In the meantime, go lead remotely. Have a good one.